Hey listener, I hope you're doing well today. I'm Akil, and you're listening to Pixels and Panels, a show where I take you deep inside the world of digital comics through conversations with your favorite characters and top industry executives. My guest today is Arisa Zart. She's one of the many talented comic creators from Germany and author of My Masochistic Boss, a fun, vibrant GL comic about a young writer's evolving relationship with her quirky editor who has a fun little secret that she's hiding. In today's episode, you will learn how Arisa failed her way to building a successful webcomic, her strategy in growing a loyal paying audience on Patreon, and catch a sneak preview of her next webcomic. She even shares which One Piece characters inspired her current main characters. Hope you enjoy the listen. Hey, Arisa, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really good. How about you?
I'm doing well. It's a beautiful day out here. So to start, do you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, about myself. So I'm Marisa. I'm a comic creator from Germany, and I'm currently also a college student. So yeah, I'm the creator of My Masochistic Boss.
I have really enjoyed My Masochistic Boss so far. I really, really like your art style, and I have a few questions about that in a little bit. But to start, how did you get into creating webtoons?
Creating webtoons, that's actually a long story, but it started with how it started for most people, I guess, when they were really young. When I was like 8 or 9 years old, I think I got into like the school library and they had like mangas out there, like comics and mangas. And I remember reading my very first manga, which was called Killer La Princess. It was about like Disney princesses, etc. It was like a collab between manga and Disney princesses. It was pretty cool back then. And I remember how like reading it, I thought, man, this is so beautiful. And I want to be able to create something like that myself. And I started to like draw comics like back then. But I remember when I was like then like I got 12 years old or something like that. I guess it was 12. Um most people around me, because I really wanted to become like a mangaka, and most people around me said to me, yeah, I mean that's like a nice hobby, etc., but nothing that you could like really earn enough money to live from. So you can like keep it as a hobby, but I wouldn't try to make it into a career or anything like that. So I like lost it a little bit. And I like specifically in middle school, I didn't drew anything whatsoever. I didn't draw for years after that, until I got like 18. And I remember that was like in high school, where my teacher would ask me, oh, what do you want to do after high school? And I said, I actually planned on either studying medicine or psychology. And I could have done that, but I just really recognized that I really hated to learn that much about like health science, because that was like that was what I was concentrating back then. That was like the main subject that we had at my school. It was like focusing on health science. And it's super interesting and I love it, but it's just so much you need to learn. And I just it was a pretty stressful time in high school, which is why my teacher said back then to me, you know what, if there's just one thing that you have that you know that you could do nearly every day without getting really sick from it, like that's your career right there. Like just at least try it until before you start to give up on it already. Just try it out and it's okay. Like give yourself the opportunity to fail sometimes and try it out and again. And the worst that can happen is that it's not going anywhere, and then you can still choose to study something that is maybe not your first choice, but at least try it out, because you might regret it way more not trying it than trying and failing nonetheless.
Yeah, I admire the courage, and someone was giving you some very strong advice at 12, which is interesting. But in terms of, you talked a little bit about the comics that you read growing up. What were some of your favorite comics, manga, anime? Curious to hear a bit more about that.
like growing up, I guess like one of my absolute favorites until this day are Hunter x Hunter and Code Geass, because I remember watching them also when I was like 12 or 13 years old. And to this day, they're still like my absolute favorite shows. And they really stuck to me specifically because like of the main characters like Killua or Lelouch, because I relate to them a lot. And they definitely left a big impact on my personality, I guess, and on a lot of things and how I view the world. Um, but other than that, also like a lot of other shows are obviously shows like One Piece, or like Vinland Saga is actually like a manga, but it's finally getting a second season. I'm so excited for it. And also shows like Akatsuki no Yona or Kingdom or Kaiji. Like I love stories that are actually really strategic, or stories where everything gets a little bit more into depth. So I know it might surprise a lot of people, because considering my comic, my Masochistic Boss, it's like a rom-com. It's really simple and silly, etc. But I actually am a huge fan of like thriller, and I love it when characters like try to trick each other. I'm a huge sucker for that.
I really want to do a bonus episode where we spend 30 minutes talking about the similarities between you and Lelouch, because I think that would be a ton of fun. But we will save that for another day. In terms of your artistic style, like I obviously, anybody listening, please go read this webtoon. It's really bright and fun and super expressive. What has been your inspiration for this artistic style?
So when I started with digital art, which was like 3 years ago now, I started to watch a lot of videos from like Lavender Town, and she has like a very cartoonish art style. And back then I had also a very cartoonish art style. Like maybe after the podcast I can show it to you, like which were like my first digital drawings. They were very cartoonish. Nothing at all what it looks like right now, but I remember when I was then like starting on Webtoon, or I wanted to start in Webtoon, I recognized that a lot of the comics that were successful had like a very anime-ish art style. So I tried to like change it a little bit so that it looks more anime-like, but like still has like some parts that reminds you of like some classical cartoons and more pastel colors. So yeah, I think it came up like that, honestly.
Yeah, the color palette that you use is just amazing, and you can see the pastel really pop. So let's talk about the webtoon, My Masochistic Boss.
Mhm.
How did you come up with the origin story here?
Well, My Masochistic Boss actually wasn't my first comic that I've been working on. I actually had like two other comics before I started to work on that. So my very first comic was actually a thriller, and was called like One More Bite, and it was like about cannibalism and all of that stuff. It was a totally different topic. But my second comic was the Impera app. Maybe you saw that on my YouTube account, like my very first video, like how to do webcomic. I show like the comic The Impera app there is like a dark fantasy. And the thing is that both of them didn't do very well. So like they did really poorly, let's be honest here. So they were not really what I wanted to work on, even though I really like the idea and I really love the comics until this day. And I'm really sad actually that I can't work on them. Um, I decided that it would be better to try to invest my time into like a third comic. And I wanted to create something that other people could enjoy, but I would like as well. So I wrote down everything that I think was like, or would be enjoyable for a broader audience, but would still be something that I enjoy. So, and this, like, My Masochistic Boss was created. So, yeah.
Yeah, of course. And one thing that piqued my interest, you mentioned that your first comic was a thriller. What has it
Mhm.
been like to change genres from a thriller to a rom-com?
Man, it was wild. Let's be honest, it was kind of wild because, yeah, the art style was also very different. It was more serious and more detailed and a little bit more realistic. And like my two protagonists were guys, like specifically my protagonist was a really muscular guy, so it was really different. But it was also kind of fun because because it was so different, it was also kind of a challenge at the beginning, because right now I'm already very used to drawing the way that I do, and I think I come to a point where I can say, yeah, I finally have like an art style that is also more recognizable than the art style that I had for my first comic. So it's a pretty huge difference, but I'm glad that I did it, and you definitely come accustomed to it.
Makes a lot of sense. Now let's talk about the characters. So you have in my masochistic boss, you have Holly, who's the editor, Blaze, who's the young writer. Do you mind talking a little bit about how you came up with these two characters as your leads?
I actually remember I was watching One Piece back then, and like one of my absolute favorite characters from One Piece is Bora Hancock. And maybe when I mention her, you might already come to the idea how I came up with Holly, because I really like the duality of Bora Hancock's character. Like she can be very cruel, rude, and very like an ice queen kind of like. And then on the other hand, she can be really cute and very adorable when she's like around Luffy. But so I kind of like I guess I kind of like came up with her character with Boy Hancock. And I was also watching another anime at that time that was called Kiss Sniper, and I remember there was one character. I actually didn't like the anime that much, but there was one character I always loved seeing on screen, and that was the character called Hisamu. And Hisamu was like a super masochist. And honestly, every scene he came up with, I laughed so much. He was so funny. And that's kind of why I came up with the idea, was like, oh, what would it be like if like someone would be a masochist where you expected the least, like some sort of boss or some chef, someone who has like a very dominant job, or a job where they need to be very powerful at some sort, but they're like secretly a masochist. So it's like a huge plot twist kind of. So yeah, I came up with that idea for Holly, and Blaze was a little bit inspired by Ace from One Piece, because I always liked like the very cool character and like his very cool demeanor, and still being very respectful and very nice to other people. At least when he got like older. I mean, when he was younger, he was a brat, but when he got older, he got very respectful, but still very cool and very kind. So I thought that someone as the counterpart who is like that, who's too cool to fall for like silly things like Holly's behavior, would be a pretty good matchup.
They are really great foils for one another. One thing that I appreciate about webtoons is it allows for creators from all different types of perspectives to come and share a story. What has it been like for you as an LGBTQ creator to create a GL webtoon?
I I absolutely agree on that webtoon part, that what I really appreciate on webtoon is that there is a lot of diversity that you don't really see on any other media, as of right now at least. I mean, it's getting better, but I think that's like one of the reasons why webtoon is becoming so popular, because a lot of people crave representation, and webtoon is like one of the few places where there's so many of that representation, like a lot of LGBTQ characters and a lot of diverse characters from all around the world. So and even for myself, I knew that if I wanted to make a comic that would be a part of like the LGBTQ comics, I knew I wanted to make a girls' love, because I'm like part of the LGBTQ community myself. So I thought, you know what, if I make an LGBTQ comic, I'm definitely doing a woman loving woman comic. Specifically because back then, for like over a year ago, there weren't a lot of girls' love comics at all. It's getting more popular for sure, but yeah, the focus has always been more like on boys love, and I like boys love, but I think like the girls need some showtime, like they need a little bit more and a little bit more attention, and they definitely deserve it.
Yeah, and I noticed in your comics, you very often take some time to shout out a few comics that you really enjoy. And it gave me a few great recommendations as well. Do you
Mhm.
mind talking a little bit more about why that's so important to you? You know, taking some time in your own comic to feature others' work?
I guess it's specifically because I know how hard it can be to be seen by other people. Because, as I've already told you, like the first two comics that I've been working on never really got recognized at all. I had like maybe 100 readers, like after 10 episodes or something like that. So it wasn't a lot. I mean, it is still a good amount, but it's really hard to get seen if you don't have anyone who's like pushing you or helping you a little bit. There are a lot of people that never really get recognized by Webtoon or Tapas and never really get featured by them. So I want to help stories that I think are absolutely worth getting seen, like to get a more huge readerships. I really want to support them a little bit more so that they get a chance. And yeah, I guess that's the main
I
reason.
love it. Makes a ton of sense. In terms of your creation of this webtoon, has there been a particular episode or scene that you enjoyed more than the others that was really fun for you to create?
Yeah, definitely. I love the intro of the very first episode. I think that was so fun because you get like thrown into the scene right there and you're like, what's going on? Because she like asks you, could you please slap me in the face? And you're like, whoa, what's going on here? I really like the first scene, specifically drawing her face when she like asked for it. And then there is also another scene that I've just drawn. It's not public yet. It's like episode 27, the end of episode 27. If you read it, you may know why. That's like one of my absolute favorite scenes, but I don't want to spoil it. And another one would be like, I think it was on episode 3 where she like reaches out to her and there are like a lot of flowers around her. Love that one as well. Like I love just when things go out a little bit out of place, because I mean it is like it's a realistic setting. It's like not a fantasy settings, and it's like the same characters over and over again, so it can be a little bit repetitive. So I'm always very glad when I can draw them in a way that is a little bit is more unique and outgoing.
So, My Masochistic Boss is a relatively new comic. You started this in December of 2020.
Mhm.
What part of comic creation has been more difficult than you imagined, and what has been easier than you might have previously anticipated?
Well, I guess hard would be that you try to meet your deadlines. I guess I thought that would be a little easier. I mean, I never missed a deadline until now, which I gotta say I'm really proud for on myself that I never did it until now, that I ever missed something. But there were times where it would get really tricky and really hard to manage that. Specifically, if you have like exams and all of that, it's just sometimes really hard. But I still like manage to do it nonetheless every time. So I'm actually really um I'm pretty sure that I will be able to manage that in the future as well. And easier would be at least for my masochistic boss, the writing is pretty easy for me. Because like for my other two comics that I had before my masochistic boss, writing was actually the most consuming part for me, that like the most time consuming part that I put a lot of effort into. Like the drawing was actually like the least amount that I've like the part that I've that took the least amount of time. So but when it comes to my masochistic boss, I think the writing actually goes very easy for me, or it's pretty easy for me to imagine what the characters will do next, because they have a very strong characteristic, which is why I can always immediately know what they will think or what they will say next. So I think that would be my answer.
Of course, in case you were curious, I have
Mhm.
missed many deadlines in spectacular fashion. So I envy your record here. Uh,
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a bit about your Patreon, which has seen very, very quick growth as well. You said earlier you started this in February of this year and you've gotten over 100 supporters. So, do you mind talking a little bit about how you first decided to do a Patreon and what inspired you to start it?
Yeah, I wanted to start with the Patreon because I remember back then when I wanted to start with the comic that I would put a lot of my free time into this. And at that time, I would also like need to have a part-time job because money, like you need at least to some extent money. And specifically because I knew back then, like my drawing tablet was slowly but surely falling apart. It had a lot of errors, and I really wanted to have a new one, but they can be really pricey. So I knew that I needed at least a little bit more money. So I came up with the idea. Yeah, a lot of other creators do that they have a Patreon. So you could totally do that yourself. And it came to the point where I got a little bit obsessed with checking out other Patreons. I like looked at so many, like at least hundreds. I'm sure I did that. I did a lot of research, like what other like more successful Patreons, what are they doing, what are they offering for what amount of money, and how much they probably like how much time they are probably taking or they need for the specific rewards. So I researched a lot because I really wanted it to get at least some amount of money back. So, and specifically because I remember my family being like, yeah, it's cool that you're drawing comics, but I mean, like, don't put too much of your free time into this because you're not gaining anything from that. And it is kind of funny because now that I earn a good amount of it, I would say, they're really supportive. Yeah, so I guess it also helped my family to see it more as something that I actually put a lot of work on, and is not just that I'm not just doing for funsies.
That's super inspiring, and I'm sure a lot of people look up to that and see, hey, I can create a living for myself doing this as well. Now, there are two very clever things that you're doing on your Patreon. The first is you provide not safe for work content, and the second is you allow subscribers to read ahead. So, do you mind talking a little bit about how you arrived at providing these two things? You mentioned you did a ton of research to get here, but I'd love
Mhm.
to understand how you decided these are the two things I'll provide.
So I noticed, I think it's way better to check out people that are smaller or have a smaller following number and are still doing very, very well. So I always looked out more for that because I think a misconception for a lot of people is that the more reader you have, that you automatically get more money from that. And obviously that tends to be the case, but that definitely doesn't need to be like that. I think I did reading ahead specifically because that's work that I'm going to do anyway. And it's easier for me because I know that I will always be able to meet my deadlines. Because if I already know, okay, I'm 3, 4 episodes ahead on my Patreon, I will always be able to meet the deadlines that I have for like my for my publish updates. And I think that's one of the reasons why I never missed an update until this point, is because I worked ahead a lot. And the not safe for work part, I think that was a strategic decision because like not safe for work is very, very popular in general, and that's something that stood out for most Patreons that have like checked out, that not safe for work always tends to be very popular. So, and I mean, I have the perfect comic to do not safe for work related content, because I mean it's like a girls off, it's romance related, they're both adults, and I don't know, it just definitely was a good opportunity to do that. And it definitely paid out because like my highest tier is actually my most popular tier. Like I think over 70% or more of my Patreons are actually in my highest tier. So yeah.
That's absolutely fascinating. And has there been anything surprising that you've learned as you've launched your Patreon in terms of what people have liked or just the reception that you've gotten?
I think the most surprising thing would be that the posts that were most liked were posts about projects that I'm planning to do, like character concept art, and not always my actual rewards that I'm posting on there. Like, I remember that my most liked post until now has been character concept of my next project, which is also a girl's love, which will be a girl's love, but it's also like a dark fantasy. So there will be like demons and all of that stuff, like supernatural creatures. And a lot of people seem to like the concept art for my two next protagonists. So that was kind of surprising, but I'm really glad that they seem to like it so far.
You've piqued my interest. Is there anything else you can tease in terms of what your next webtoon will look like, or when fans can expect it?
The next comic, I actually even have a name already for it. It will be called Too Cute to Kill. And yeah, as I already said, it will be like a dark fantasy, and there will be like a huntress, and she like gets stuck in that supernatural world, and now she needs to get along with like supernatural beings and creatures. And like there will be a lot of fun characters, like a female orc or a witch that fights with an axe, like stuff like that. And I'm super excited actually to draw that, because I always wanted to draw something more fantasy related, and I think that would be really cool. The art style will actually be very similar to the one of my masochistic boss, but with a little bit more like lightning effects, so that it seems a little bit more fantasy-ish. So it will be a little less simplistic, but still recognizably my art, definitely. And when it will be to expect, I'm still working on the first two episodes, so I'm still very in the beginning. But if I ever get an assistant, I know if I ever get an assistant, it might get faster. So we will see how it goes in the future. But I definitely like want to at least finish like the first 4 or 5 episodes before I start publishing it.
Yeah, on your Patreon, you mentioned you want to hire an assistant,
Mhm.
which is interesting because it shows that you want to reinvest back in the comic. So it seems like this assistant will just be able to help you produce more stories. Is that the way you've been thinking about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I really want to have an assistant, even if it's just for like base colors or for simple stuff that nearly everyone else could do, just so that I have more time to like work on a second project. That means that it won't change a lot for my masochistic boss, but it would help me to like get out a second comic faster, and to be able to work separately on a second comic while also working on my first comic, masochistic boss, without it getting left behind or anything like that. And yeah, other things that I invested my money on would be like an ergonomical chair, because they're really expensive, but I really am so happy that I did that, because it definitely helped my back pain. Because you really need to watch out for that when you're sitting for like hours and hours, and not when you're just drawing, but in general, people who are sitting a lot, they should really watch out and look for better chairs, because my old chair was a disaster.
That's definitely a nice pro tip. Last thing I had about the Patreon.
Mhm.
Do you have any advice for young creators who want to make more money? It's super inspiring to see how quickly you've gone from launching this Patreon to providing yourself with a base to give yourself a bit more income and opportunity to reinvest back into your art.
I think one tip that I would absolutely give is that you should like, please don't be embarrassed or afraid or anything like that to market it, because there are a lot of very great Patreon pages with very nice rewards, and they have a big readership, but a lot of them that aren't doing well aren't really promoting it very well. So I would definitely recommend to watch out for that, and like trying to promote it as good as you can, even if it's just like a little teaser at the end of like some episodes or something like that, and just showing what people can get there. That can make a huge difference, or at least I noticed that it definitely makes a huge difference, because every time when I announce something, there come a lot of new people to my Patreon. So I definitely recommend always promote, because marketing is such an important part for trying to make money with it. And even, I mean, I only started like a few months ago, but I do think that specifically when I like published the second story, I'm probably going to be able to live from that one day, or that seems to be the case. Like it's going into that direction. That's not currently the case, but I think that it will become like that in the future.
So you talked about the importance of promotion here. Do you mind sharing a little bit about how you've promoted to grow your Patreon?
It's actually a little. It's actually pretty simple. Like when you have early access, for example, you show like a little teaser from the next episodes, just so that people get maybe a little curious. Specifically, the more tense situations get, people will be like, oh, I really need to know what happens right now. And I know that from myself, because every time when I was reading like an original or something, I would be, when there's like a very tense moment, it would be like, oh my God, I really need to happens right now. So I would pay like for the fast pass episodes because I had no self-control. I think like that's a good thing. Or also the thank you Patreon. I have like at the end of my episodes are always mention my patrons with their name, and I thank them for supporting me. And I think that's also pretty good, because the more people you get on that list, the more you will look like someone who's also very reliable, because you already have so many people paying and supporting you on Patreon. So the more people it gets, I think, the more other people will be willing to be like, oh, okay, so if there are so many people, there probably will be something worth paying for. At least I think that's the case, but I might be wrong.
That's a very smart way to build the awareness of Patreon, having those names at the bottom. So really, really enjoy that. The next thing I wanted to talk to you a bit about is the creator community in Germany. So from what I've understood, there's a very tight-knit group of German webtoon artists. And one of your recent episodes actually is a Oktoberfest collaboration highlighting a bunch of different characters from Germany. Do you mind talking a little bit more about what it's like to be a webtoon artist in Germany and what the community there looks like?
Mhm. So about the webcomic community in Germany, I think it's kind of pity actually, because there are a lot of creative people in Germany in general, but it's not very like it's not encouraged to be more creative in Germany in general. Let's say, like, most people will recommend you to not go into a direction that is more creative. So which is very sad, because I know a lot of people here are very creative and really want to be more creative careers and want to try that out. But a lot of people get tucked out of it, like I did when I was very young, because most people obviously want something that is very secure, but yeah, they don't think that they can get that in like the webcomic community. And all, obviously it's not easy, it's actually very hard, and it definitely needs a lot of time to build that up, but it's definitely not impossible. And as you already talked about, like the German community, like the Discord community, for example, we have like a Discord community there with like a lot of more popular German creators there. The creators from like The Little Trash Mate or Let's Cast Off or Idiots Don't Catch Calls, You've Got to Be Kidding Me. Like all of these are very popular, and they actually are from German creators. So it's surprising for a lot of people, but a lot of the more popular webtoons on Webtoon are actually German, which is pretty cool. And there actually has been coming out a Webtoon German site. Like when you change the language, there are different sites, like from like the Korean webtoon or the English webtoon, Spanish, French, etc. And there has been one, like there has been also a German one that has been coming out like in April, and they actually wanted to like also get German originals, but they didn't do that until now. So I'm definitely curious to see if they will change something, but until now we haven't really heard anything from that. So that's really sad, but I hope that it will change.
Do you mind sharing a bit more about how you all came up with the Oktoberfest collab, which I thought was really cool and fun to see all the different art that people are producing?
We came up with that idea because we thought we always wanted to like do a collab together, but we thought that it would be very fun since we are all German creators to do something that is like more specific to Germany. And like the Oktoberfest came into mind, and we thought, yeah, that would be a pretty cool idea because you can draw your characters on like cute dirndls and all of that stuff. So I was really excited to draw them in that cute little dresses. They looked so adorable.
Yeah, it was very cool to see each character kind of take on a little bit of the culture from the creator. It was really cool to read. About the webtoon industry in particular, is there anything that you wish could be different? You talked a bit about the challenges in Germany specifically, where young artists might be discouraged from becoming webtoon artists, but are there other things that you would like to change as well?
Definitely. I think I would wish for it to become more of an option for people to become like freelancers, that it gets talked more about, specifically because nowadays you have so many possibilities, specifically because of like online social media, etc. That are all possibilities that you didn't have like 10 years ago. Like, it's really crazy how everything like started to change and gets more and more into the direction that more people can be like indie creators or self-publishing freelancers, etc., and are absolutely able to live from that. And I just hope that something like that gets a little bit more like encouraged. Obviously, it shouldn't you should always have like a plan B for everything, because that's not 100% always secure that you will be able to live from this. But it shouldn't be people shouldn't be discouraged, and I hope it gets more and more into that direction.
And my final question for you, Arisa, what advice would you give a young, aspiring webtoon artist?
It's okay to fail. And it's absolutely okay to give up a comic idea, because I think a lot of people, when they start with comics, start with like their huge idea that they have in mind, like the story that they always wanted to draw for years and years. And honestly, I know I a lot of people hate to hear that, but I wouldn't start with that comic, because like the first comic that you do, you improve so much in a very short amount of time, and you will hate yourself for starting with your passion project at first. So I wouldn't do that. I think it's way better to start with maybe a smaller idea and just trying and seeing if something does well. And even if it doesn't, like don't be ashamed to say, okay, it just isn't for me, so I want to try other things, I want to try different things. And you don't need to feel pressured to finish something if you're not entirely behind it. And yeah, don't be afraid to draw whatever you want, because that's like the most beautiful thing about webtoon, that you have that extremely creative freedom. And yeah, also that I already mentioned it, but please, specifically if your goal is that you want to try to earn some sort amount of money with that, please don't forget, like, get yourself out there, market and promote it. It's not a bad thing to promote yourself, because a lot of people feel kind of icky. I think when I talk to them, they feel like, I don't want to ask for money, etc. They feel kind of bad about it, and I always say you should know how much your work is worth for, and that you take a lot amount of time to draw this. So please be proud of your work, and definitely know the worth of your work.
That is lovely advice, Arisa. Thank you so much for taking some time to get on our show today. Listener, you can follow Arisa on all social media platform at Arisa's Art. Arisa, once again, thank you so much. And please go check out My Masochistic Boss. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any feedback or want to be featured as our next guest, please write to us at pixelsandpanelspod@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe, like, or give us a 5-star rating. See you all next week.